First off, Andrew and Drew, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate the time. These meetups have turned into a weekly thing because we all have a little more downtime, and giving away a little more value to people who have questions or curiosity about multi-units or any of these topics is always really valuable right now. Plus, I can't record new podcasts, so content. I suppose I'm gonna roll into the first question with Drew, and we'll flip it to Andrew. Okay. Just for those people in the room that are curious about investment properties or multi-units in general, Drew, what is your definition of a multi-unit, and what defines a multi-unit versus a income property versus like a duplex or a triplex, for example?
Well, yeah, it's there's a lot of terms that are used interchangeably, like duplex and semi-detached. They're not the same thing. So multi-unit generally means one property or one PID with multiple doors or residential units in it. That could be as low as two to as high as 100, 200. It depends on the size of the building.
Okay. Andrew, when we have, as realtors, as residential, we can do duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. When do we need to bring in, when does a deal become commercial for a investment property per se? At what point do we have to go commercial avenue to get a deal done rather than a residential?
Do you mean like financing wise?
Yes, financing wise, because not a lot of people understand that there is a difference in the mortgage package when you get up to certain units.
So there's some different products out there. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's over 4 units is commercial financing, but here's the other aspect of it too. I just bought a 2-unit property, but I bought it in a holding company. So I'm commercial financing in that case, but there's some cool products out there for that as well. So like my terms are pretty much residential because I went through BMO. And there's a couple banks that are still financing stuff that's like under 6, or if you can do it in a holding company, but it's still like a residential mortgage basically.
Okay. How did you, when you were purchasing it through a holding company, was there any type of complications with the bank at all, or was it just a standard residential mortgage through the holding company?
It was okay because it was just the holding company, so I was still basically pre-approved on my own financials and stuff. It was literally just a shell company to hold the property, and it was just for tax purposes. For me, it worked out better, not necessarily for like the month-to-month aspect, but where I'm incorporated, pulling all that cash out for a down payment is, crippling tax-wise, basically. So that was the big reason for doing it that way. Okay.
Drew, when you get a client and when you get an investor client and you're qualifying them for an investment property, when you're looking at them in the market, what are you looking for? What is your criteria of a good investment property for a client in this market?
Well, it used to be, I think Andrew would agree with me, that the going rate or rate of return would be 5% and up, but now I think they're selling for anywhere between 3.5 and 4. The reason for it is something that's we're all seeing, is that the property values of these properties are going up higher than the rents can match. So as a result, the cap rates are going down. So I'd say to any investor, anything around 4% is fair in these parts. But if you want to get a higher rate, then you need to leave the city, go to Truro, Bridgewater, Yarmouth, if you want to be that risky.
Yarmouth.
Well, just because the ferry, right? It's just there's a lot of stuff going on there. So,
are you working outside the city with your clients right now, Drew? Are you going to Truro? Are you going to a Kentville? Are you going to a Bridgewater?
No, I'm not. If there's anyone on my team that wants to take that on for me, then they're doing it. Okay. I'm sticking to city limits, not because of any COVID restrictions per se, although I'm permitted to leave due to special exemptions. But it's my specialty is not in those townships. I know very little about them.
Yeah. Okay. Andrew, same question points to you. What are you looking for right now for clients to help them purchase investment properties right now in the city?
Yeah, I would agree. Like cap rates are lower overall right now. Obviously the higher cap rate, the better. And I think there's kind of 2 things I look at. Like, to me, there's kind of 2 main avenues of what makes a good investment property. So the first one would be it cash flows very well, right? That would be the first one. The second one would be it's in an area that's going to grow long term. So I think it depends how long they want to hold them as well. So I guess real life example would be, personally, I would take a lower cap rate on the peninsula because I feel the growth is going to be really strong there, or like in a Fairview or downtown Dartmouth, compared to If you go to Truro, you're probably not going to see the same growth, but it's going to be way more cash flow positive. So it kind of depends on what that client's needs are at the time, right? And how long they want to hold the property for as well, I think.
When I get a client who is an investor, I try to understand what their strategy is, whether it's buy and holding, burring, flipping, any one of the, or actually like right now in Halifax, you can do the equity gain. You can just buy a property, hold it for a year, and sell it later for a profit off the equity gains that the peninsula is seeing. And when I figure out what they're really doing, maybe they're cash flow incentivized, so they only want cash flow in their units. Well, then we're not shopping HRM. We're going outside of Truro or Kentville to find, because those markets do cash flow really well right now in terms of you can get a property, a duplex for 250,000 and they'll cash flow $1,000 a month. Yeah. It depends what the criteria is for the.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. There's one thing, a new strategy that I've started using with my investors looking for peninsular or even mainland properties that are multi-units, is to look at the income and expenses and see what can be switched over to the tenants instead of the landlord. So say, for example, the heating costs are included and they have a 4-stair system. Well, that one's easy. You have you put in a ducted heat pump or a ductless one, and you put it on the power meters that the tenants are paying for, and you immediately remove a $5,000 to $15,000 to $20,000 annual bill, and then that changes the rate completely. So why someone else isn't looking at it for those reasons, because the numbers don't make sense, now they suddenly do.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting, because now you're just switching out the utility.
Yeah, you're rearranging your numbers to make sense. So if there's anything you can shave off and either pass it down to the tenant or convert it so that it's cheaper. I mean, going from oil to propane or gas, and like there's so many different things you can change to make the numbers make more cash flow positive sense.
Yeah.
But the other biggest one too is that if it's electric, then instead of you paying for it, make the tenant pay for it. These things are just, you have to keep an eye out for the more surgically minded things.
Yeah. Andrew, how are you finding this market affect your investors personally? You said you just purchased one, so it's good for you because you saw a good deal, but how are your investors finding this climate in terms of getting and purchasing properties and assets?
Yeah, definitely. I think the easiest or the most effective way to kind of do it right now, and the new rent cap kind of changes this a little bit, but I think the best way to do it right now is to buy something that, like Andrew just said, can be reworked to make the numbers work, or some renovations go into it and the rents go way up. So if you're getting something that's vacant or that the tenants are on fixed term and about to leave, and of course the rent cap kind of changes what you're going to look at in that case. But let's face it, I would say at least 80% of the investment properties that I show in the run of a regular month, they're not maximizing the profit there. No. Whether it's the rents are too low, or they're paying, just the utilities they're paying are ridiculous, or whatever, right? So the one that I just bought, I got one side vacant, the other side is fixed term until the spring. So it needs work. I'm gonna renovate the vacant side, and the rent's gonna go up like $600 a month. Yeah. When the other tenant leaves in the spring, I'll do the same thing. It has 2 separate meters. It's all electric heat. Right now, it's not divided the way it should be. It has laundry. It's going to have parking when I'm done with it, and it has 2 separate water lines. So literally, my only expenses are mortgage and taxes and insurance, right? Yeah. So that's really what I look for, right? Or if it's on separate meters, like maybe you have a house meter that you're paying, but the tenants are paying the rest. So it's always just about maximizing that as much as possible.
Yeah. How where is this duplex, if you don't mind me asking?
This one's just off of Quinpool Road, off of Harvard.
How much you pay for it? I gotta ask, just because.
$642.
Oh, that's not bad.
That's not bad. That's not bad at all.
For Quinpool Road, side by side, everything.
Yeah, it's on Yale Street, like right behind Athens Restaurant.
Okay.
There's one that I was watching for a while, and I was kind of like, why isn't this selling? And then eventually I was like, I got to look at this property.
Is it up down?
Hmm?
Is it an up down duplex or side by side?
Side by side.
Okay.
So they're both like 2-level, 3-bed, 1-bath.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it owned by the same people who owned Athens?
No.
Okay, because they have one too that's on a separate PID right behind it, because I think McDonald's wants to buy that land.
They do. Yeah, the neighbors told me all about that. We'll see if they develop across the street from it, but either way, it won't kill the investment for me either way. But
Yeah. Did you find it privately or was it on MLS?
On MLS. Yeah.
Wow.
They had it up like probably a little bit higher than it should have been originally. And I think in this market, I just think that people probably just assumed there was something wrong with it, right? That's the way I look at it. And the more I kind of looked at it, the more it made sense. And I was, I'm happy to do the renos. I like doing that. So yeah, it's a good find for me, kind of a diamond in the rough in a tough market, right? And that's the thing. It's getting harder to find places, but they are out there. You got to be really proactive in the way you run the numbers and the way you like Andrew said, like getting creative with them really is the best way to make money right now.
We got an over and under flat on Yonge Street right off Connaught Avenue in the fall of 2019. So it was a good year for us, and we knew that we had to buy another or a third or a fourth before we had to start paying our taxes for 2020 or 2019 and 2020. But we found this when I was searching for expireds, and I stumbled upon it that another agent had it listed, and we go in and we're like, wow, there's 2 bedrooms up, 1 bedroom down. We snagged it for 350,000. And it's in really good shape, and it has a garage and everything. So yeah, that was the find of the century.
It's worth 650 now.
Easy. I'd cash out, but my wife's ex is in the basement, and one of the agents at our office is in the upper unit.
That'd be a wonderful story at the office.
Yeah.
I have to maintain my image somewhat. So anyway.
When Andrew, for Andrew, for people that are in this meetup that are thinking about purchasing their first investment property, what criteria are you looking for when you're assessing whether a specific multi-unit is a good purchase or not? What are you looking for as a whole package?
Yeah, so I guess here's the main things I always look for. I look for, like, location is huge. That's really what's going to drive your rent, right? Like, even if you're, I live in the west end of Halifax. There's a big difference between being right by the Commons and being out by, I have a triplex on Windsor Street that's almost down by the Exchange. There's a big difference in rents from there to Yale Street, right? Yep. So the location, I always think of, like, what are the big things people are going to look for, right? So I love 2-bedroom units personally, because I find that they're easy to rent. There's a lot of people looking for, like, 2-bedroom units and 1-bedroom units. So I really like those. But at the same time, if there's 3-bedroom units, you can get higher rents, but I just find they're harder to rent.
Yeah.
I always look at some big things like, is there parking, or is there ability to get parking somewhere? So the Yale one, for example, there's no driveway, but there's a right of way in the driveway next door. The yard is really deep. So I'm going to get rid of 2/3 of the back part of the backyard and add parking slots along the back.
Okay.
Laundry, I think, is a big one as well. And then just the overall, condition of the units really. But especially if you're looking, like, in Halifax, there's a lot of units that don't have laundry. So is there ability to put one in, or is there not? I always think, like, right now, it's so easy to rent anything because there's no rentals. But I always think, like, okay, in 5 years, what's it look like? Right? Like, is it still the same, or is the vacancy rate now 10%? Because if the vacancy rate's way up, then you still need to have a good product to get what you want out of it. So I think, I always look at, like, what's going to make people rent this compared to the 2-bedroom that's 1 street over, right? Yeah. So if they're all basically equal, otherwise they're going to take the one with laundry or the one with parking or whatever, right? So I think those are kind of the important points I look for.
On the note of laundry, we found a really interesting solution with our lower unit on Yonge Street, further to Andrew's point. Yeah. So we had trouble with trying to get ventilation for the dryer. So what we determined was it's easier to actually plumb those European combo units because they can both wash and dry at the same time. They are a little bit more expensive, but then you don't have to worry about any more cutting, any foundation work. The list goes on. And it's actually really cool because after it's done washing, it heats up, and then the steam is drained out through the plumbing. There's no steam coming out the vent of the pipe.
Yeah, I've seen those, and they're really cool. And you know what? Like, when you factor in the fact that you just saved, maybe $300 to $500 in the ventilation to get it out of there, and you're only buying 1 unit, not 2, the $1,200 or $1,300 for that unit becomes a little more on par with what you would have spent anyway.
Well, and it also saves space because a lot of these units are relatively small too. So
yeah, absolutely.
When for Drew, when Andrew didn't mention numbers and in terms of like property taxes, Nova Scotia Power, water bills, do you take in consideration the actual costs associated with the property, or do you only look for the criteria that Andrew mentioned in terms of location, bedroom sizes, utilities included, ways to make that apartment or rental unit seem more appealing to the public? Or do the numbers come into play for you and your clients?
Well, my clients are more number conscious than I am.
Okay.
When I'm looking for an investment myself, the numbers be damned. I want the location and it has to make sense.
Yep.
You can change the numbers. The numbers are relative based on use, based on orientation. That doesn't change, or that can change, whereas the actual physical property itself doesn't change.
Yeah.
When it comes to just the numbers, yeah, a lot of my investors are more number conscious. And if it doesn't make sense immediately on paper, then they're just not going to make a move. But the problem with that mentality, there were some who were more aggressive than others, but the problem with that mentality is the numbers never really make sense. You know what I mean? You have to make them make sense. It's not like buying a product at a store. You have to really analyze the breakdown. Otherwise, it's just, you're not going to find anything. And if you do find something with a great number, you've got 20 other people behind you in a lineup to buy it. So
I was going to say that's where the real imagination has to come into play, because when you find that perfect unit that cash flows, that's at a great price in this market, as Drew said, you have 20 idiots behind you, all waiver offers in hand, and they're all there, and it's going to jump up by 50, 100, 120, 125,000, because the thing is that this market is appreciation is building so quickly that you can actually overextend yourself on a unit, and in 2-3 years time it'll probably forgive you with the way the market's going. And we talked about in 10 years will the rentals still be what they are. We can't gauge that, but at least in the next 2 or 3 years we're not going to solve the vacancy crisis right now, and at least in the immediate future there's not enough developments going on, right?
You're going to see about 5 years before the effects of the center plan and all those developments coming to fruition actually get completed.
Yeah.
Until then, we're really guessing. We have no idea.
Yeah. All we do is guess.
And I think like from a numbers perspective too, like what I was talking about earlier of like the cash flow versus the long-term gain, right? Like it looks different for everybody. I'm 30. All of my investments that I'm making, like I'm basically in acquisition mode for the next 10 years in my head. And everything I'm doing right now, like I'm not planning on selling it for 20 years. So I'm not as worried about like making $1,000 a month off this building. Like as long as it's doing its thing and breaking even, you know, in my head, my triplex on Windsor Street is going to be worth a lot more money in 20 years from now than it is now. Right. Yeah. So that's, you know, but somebody who's, you know, maybe 55 might, and they're about to go into retirement, they might want something that's, you know, in Sackville, but cash flowing better, or in Truro, but cash flowing better, because they're not thinking like maybe the long term. They're thinking like, how can I, you know, help my situation right now? So it looks different for everybody. Right. But I'm on board with like the ones that are the diamonds in the rough. Like everybody wants them, right? Like I've had a lot of people come to me lately and they're like, you know, I'm looking for like 8 to 12 units, you know, cash flow positive. And I'm like, get in line, man. Like there's a lot of people looking for that. There's a lot, everybody wants that, right?
Yeah. For me, I'm actually just sending all my clients to Truro and Kentville. I'm not even playing in the city when it comes to it. Like the only time I play in the city right now with investment properties is if I have an investor who likes BR.
Yeah.
Buy, renovate, refinance, rent, repeat. If they like that strategy, I think Halifax right now is the ideal time for implementing that particular strategy, because the refi and the way the equity is growing so quickly is if you hold a property for 3 to 6 months as you're doing renovations, when you go to refi, the number you pull out is going to be higher than what you originally expected because of the gains in the market. Yeah. Right. Drew, how do you view like implementation of different investment strategies when it comes to purchasing multi-units? Are you savvy in terms of like having an investor who specializes in BR or buying and holding and trying to figure out what market's the best for them?
Well, it really depends on their long-term strategy that Andrew talked about. He's in an aggressive acquisition mode. We are and were as well. Most of our younger people are too. Like they want to buy one, they're renovating them now. They're going to refinance them by the end of the year and then purchase something else. Yeah. I'm finding that it really depends on the long-term goal of each person. Yeah. The days of buying a cash flow property in Halifax, I think, are limited for now.
Yeah. Especially with the rent cap.
Yeah.
The rent cap is
2%.
Yeah, it's 2% and it expires, or they review it February 2022. Andrew, what are your thoughts on the rent cap and the implementation of that during this time? My smile.
This should be good. I love it.
Yeah, he's asking you.
Yeah. Andrew,
Oh,
I'm
you are.
asking you.
Sorry, you are
Yeah, I said
asking.
Andrew, not Drew.
I'm Drew, remember?
He's Drew.
Yeah.
Right. You know what? I'm not saying that, like I can acknowledge that the lack of rentals in the city as a whole is a massive issue. I think that, the government has failed to put an effective affordable housing strategy in place. That's my opinion on it. I'm not saying there shouldn't be a rent cap, because I think there should be some protection there. Do I think it should be 2%? No, to be honest. I think it's low. I do think that when the state of emergency is over, or when we get to February next year, I think there will be another rent cap put in place. I would be surprised if there wasn't. Rankin's come right out and said multiple times that he's going to do something about it until the affordable housing crisis is fixed, which, like, let's face it, that's not going to be fixed overnight, right? And again, I get it. Like, you see the stories, like you see people that are, paying rent, and they get, they get a $2,000 increase, and then they're out on the street and there's nowhere for them to go. And, I feel for those people. Like, I looked at one not that long ago on a street in the West End, and you two, especially Andrew, or especially Drew, you very well might have been in this one. It was an over-under.
Oh, is that the one on the corner?
No, but so the tenant was home in the basement. We were there, and she was an older lady. She was probably like mid-70s, real sweet lady. She was like doing a puzzle when I walked in, and she was paying, like, 1-bedroom basement unit. She was paying like $600, and, like, as we know, that would be very low market rent. Like, market rent was probably like 1,100, I would say.
Yep, close to it.
And my clients kind of looked at me, and they were looking to, like, own or occupy a spot. They were first-time home buyers, and they kind of looked at me and they're like, what do we do about that? And I kind of looked at them. I was like, I don't know. That just ruined my day. Like, I don't know what to do about that. Like, technically you could serve her that you're moving in there if you have the heart to do it. Like, I certainly don't, but, like, somebody is probably going to. And in my head, I was just like, that was a real life situation of, like, here's the problem the city has firsthand, right? And that's, it's tough to see, but it's a reality of life too. But when I was looking at that one in particular, I was just like, man, I really hope that somebody buys that and doesn't kick that lady out. Like, I just, I pictured my own grandmother down there basically, and I was just, like, basically sick to my stomach about it. So
that's the hard part about weighing when you're dealing with multis too. For the most part, you're dealing with savvy investors who care about dollars and cents. There's very little emotion involved. That's why the single family residential properties have gone through the roof, is because they're so emotionally driven. But when you have that mixture of emotion and business, it starts to really mess with you. Further to Andrew's point, he's a little bit nicer to the government than I am. I'm more which is why he was waiting for my response. Yeah. But no, the idea of any time a government gets involved in regulating market prices, from food to real estate to rent to cars to gasoline, it just creates this big, when does it stop? Where does the buck end? And it actually makes things worse, because when you push back or you put restrictions in place to something that's growing and increasing, there's usually a side effect, and I can't predict what that is. But government meddling and that kind of thing, I don't think is a good idea. I think that what they did do on a municipal level and pass the center plans so developers can redevelop the city by right will relieve the pressure on the housing problem. I don't think affordable housing from a government perspective or standpoint will usually work out well, because if you look at all public housing projects in the past, they have a reputation for a reason. And that's not it just goes down to basic economics.
Yeah. I'll elaborate on my sense as well, in a sense of I'm not a fan of it, but I also understand why it has to be implemented for those, as Andrew's example of the older lady on $600 a month who can't afford more. I think in Halifax particularly, we have a special problem in the sense that we've had landlords hold properties for 20 years and not increase rents because they were cash flowing, because 20 years ago they paid cents on the dollar for what it is today, but now they're selling market value, handing the investor the bag, and saying, you can deal with this now. I've not done any renovations. I've not done any upkeep. And I've got clients who are paying undervalued rents. I truly believe that to get us out of the housing crisis is you need the private investors and private developers to go forward and take possession of, or build the underdeveloped units to bring them up to market standard in the community as well. And as soon as with the 2% rent cap, you've decentivized the private developers or private investors to go in there with their money. The problem with the market right now in terms of rentals in the city is you have so few units that it doesn't matter what condition they're in, they can get away with charging these exponentially large rents because there's nothing else on the street. If you were to get investors in and let them be able to go do their job and acquire assets and do the renovations to bring them up to snuff, instead of having one bedroom, one bathroom on the market for $1,600, you might have 5, 6, 7, 8 in the same block or same walking distance and then suddenly you all have to lower your prices to be competitive because you're at 600 and everyone else is at 1,200 or 1,100 or 1,000 or 900. Suddenly you're never going to rent it out because there is competition. To take away that competition it's almost, I understand what they're trying to do because they're trying to protect the current tenants and current renters of the city. But in a regard, you've almost fed them to the wolves because no one's going in there. I know most of my investors won't touch Halifax anymore. Yeah. That's just the way it is. They're going to a Truro or a Kentville and they're implementing the same strategies. It's B.R.R.R.R. Typically was what we're seeing right now for me in my business of buying a depreciating asset, bringing it up, raising the rents, but then the tenants love it in a Kentville or a Truro because they're raising the standard and quality of living. You're not getting that in Halifax right now because no one wants to take on the idea of a 2% cap and putting in, look at the price of lumber and material for
Can't do it.
No one wants to take on the renovations, the cost of renovations only for a 2%. It's bad business. And Drew said, investors are only business minded and business savvy, and it's a bad business model when you go out of business. That is my little tangent on that 2% rent cap.
It certainly changes what you're willing to look at as a good investment, right? So the one I just bought, if that was 2 leases in there that are year over year and they're $500 under market value as it is, I'm not touching it, right? Yeah. And that's, so I want something vacant or I want something that's fixed term that I know, and I'm willing to take the hit for a year on the numbers especially where it's a long-term play for me. I'm willing to take that hit for like the next 8 months until I can get it to where I want it to go before I refinance it. But I wouldn't be willing to take it as like a 5 or 6 year hit and have no idea when I can fix it up, right? And that's kind of the uncertainty of that is scary to investors. And I do think there's going to be another rent cap put in place. I really do. And the first one kind of came out of thin air, let's face it. And they retrograded it back to when, like, I had 2 clients that bought properties and closed them. And by the time they were closed, the rent cap came into place and it totally changed what the current numbers looked like. And it's like, wow, like, so why is that retrofitted back to September, right? Like,
well, and back to my point about how government getting involved with business is never a good thing, unless it's like that old Adam Smith's invisible hand, so to speak, is that, on one hand, the city is trying to encourage, that's the difference between the city and the province, is that that dichotomy that never really works out well, is on one hand, we have the city encouraging private investment in order to increase the amount of units in the city as per the center plan and other developments. But then you have the provincial government on the other restricting private money from doing that. Yeah. And unless there's a balance struck where something changes, then that we're going to be creating a bigger problem, because now private money will not be reinvested or investing their money into building more units at the cost of that rent cap. So if anything, the prices of rent will naturally be forced up anyway.
Well, and the more development, the more, like, if you look at the GDP or whatever, like, development and construction is one of the top things, right? So, like, not only does the lack of private developers, halt the growth of new units, but it also is halting jobs and, in the economy and buying from Kent and buying from all these places. And it trickles down, right, to everything.
I've got 2 questions, two for Drew and one for both of you. Drew, just for those people in the chat who want to see the center plan, want to see what Halifax's intention is as a municipality over the next 5 years of what the development is going to look like. for their own, because like maybe picking where they're putting a major development is a great place to buy an investment property. Where can they go find the center plan?
Google, just literally centerplan.ca, and it'll take them right to it. There's a really cool interactive map, which is really where you find the most interesting parts of it. Now, there's the rules and regulations and different packages, but on the interactive map, it's all color coded, and each color indicates a different height restriction. Like say for like pink, I think is 50 meters. Blue is 90, and so on, right? Anyways, and there's also, it shows you what the floor ratios are registered as well. So say, for example, you have a 10,000 square foot lot and the build ratio is a 3.5. You literally take 10,000 square feet, times it by 3.5, and that's the amount of square footage that can be put in that particular spot. From a multi-unit perspective, this is just pure investment alone. If investors want to look at those corridors, and they're all specific, then they can actually strategically buy property along those corridors.
Yeah.
And then once they're ready, it's like Robert Kiyosaki's, 4 greenhouses and a red hotel. You get the block, you knock it down, and usually those homes are in those corridors and not in the best of shape anyway. And then you have this 50+ unit apartment building.
Yeah. I want to highlight zoning and occupancy and how important they are to multi-units as well, because I don't think they're talked about enough. Andrew, when you're looking at an investment property, how important is it to have zoning and an occupancy permit to qualify before you end up purchasing that unit?
Yeah, so occupancy permit, I would say not as much. Not that it's not nice to have, it certainly is. But a lot of times they're lost, right? Like, so that the occupancy permit was issued in 1946, but it's long gone now. But I think zoning is important. Everybody, if you ask 10 different investors or 10 different realtors, you probably get 10 different answers on this. And Drew might even have a different opinion.
No, I agree with him. I
think zoning is important. Personally, I would not want to own illegal units. That's the way I look at it. And I'm not saying illegal from like it has to be up to 2021 building code and standards, but like, if I'm buying a triplex, I want it to be 3 legal units for sure. I think it's worth more money in the long term. I think there's some liability there personally, and I don't know for sure, but like, here's a question for Drew. He might know this. What happens if you own a 4-unit property that's only really a legal 3 or a legal 2, and it burns to the ground? Well, I don't really want to know.
Your insurance doesn't cover you.
Yes. And that's, so that's one thing. And then I wonder if there would be further liability potentially coming from, the relatives if somebody like burned to death in the building or something. And obviously that's, worst case scenario, but I think it's important for them to be legal. I think from a value perspective, they're worth way more if they're legal. Yeah. My first house was a 2-unit on the corner of Windsor and Connolly. I lived in one, I rented the other one. Renovated the whole thing throughout. And when I added the 3rd unit, I had to pull a variance. I went through the whole permitting process to add that basement unit. And yes, it was a royal pain in the ass to get it there, especially when on the opposite corner, there's a 36-unit apartment building and I'm arguing to get 3 on the opposite corner and not change the height or the dimensions of the building at all.
Yeah.
But we did get it. And to me, I think it's worth way more as a legal, especially now with like the backyard suites and the in-law suites. Like you could have a 2-unit with like an in-law suite below, but to me that's a little bit gray, and I would rather have it legal for sure.
You beat me to my next question. Drew, you said you agree with Andrew on that, so I'm going to let that question lie. But back in September, we all know that HRM approved secondary backyard suites. Have you seen any of your clients use that in terms of creating more housing on a plot of land? Or have you seen any significant impact of that bylaw change since the implementation in September?
I don't think the effects have been fully felt yet.
Yeah.
There are some clients of mine. So actually the clients are my parents. So full disclosure, they bought a duplex on Klein Street in the fall of 2019. And there's a detached wired garage in the back. And, as per the new city bylaw, they can put in a backyard, literally a backyard suite. In some cases, you could put a 3rd unit if you wanted to, but they put in plumbing, they put in electricity. It's going to be a cool little bachelor. They're either going to Airbnb it or rent it out. So there are some people who are doing that right now. There are some sellers who have like a legal duplex with a 3rd unit that's not. They'll try to take advantage of that and calling it a triplex, but it's not.
Yeah, because they don't have zoning.
Yeah, from what Andrew was saying about a legal liability standpoint, there is more value than just a duplex, but not as much as a triplex, right? So it's kind of like that midway between both unit types. So that there has been a spike in value to a degree, but it's not been. I don't think it's been widely felt yet.
Yeah. To go back to zoning, I do have a little story I can share from my career in a sense of a few years ago. I had a client looking for an investment property down in southern Halifax, and there was one on Jubilee. It was listed and advertised as an 8-bedroom student rental housing. And we did the inspection, and all 3 units, we knew they wouldn't, but none of the 3 bedrooms in the basement met egress, and they didn't have zoning for those units. So we actually were able to knock off $100,000 off of the purchase price to compensate for the illegal advertising. That's when zoning can really be helpful in purchasing properties as well, because if it doesn't meet what's advertised, and sometimes the agent misses it or doesn't check it, and you can find yourself a better deal there or a better negotiation tool there. So understanding what zoning is and making sure you get zoning is a really big thing when you're looking at purchasing these properties, because as Andrew said, you want to make sure you're legally safe in case of a fire, in case of a disaster, in case something goes wrong.
Well, going back to zoning, there's that other misconception as well, just because they think that if it's R2 zoned, it's automatically 2 units. Well, no, it could be in an R2 zone, but hasn't been checked off or inspected by the city to make it a legal 2 unit. And that's why the zoning letter comes very handy, because it actually shows how it's registered. It doesn't mean it has to be that way forever, but that's how it is currently registered with the municipality. And that's something that is key. I mean, that can make or break a deal, right?
Yeah, 100%.
A little trick you can use too is if you look it up on property valuation services, it'll say how many living units are in it. And generally speaking, it's pretty accurate in terms of like, so in other words, if they think that it's 3 units, it's probably zoned for 3 units basically. And it's not 100% accurate, but if you're looking just to get a rough idea before you even look at something, that's a pretty good place to start. But yeah, to your point, like the R2, there's so many more factors that come into play, right? You could have a legal 4 unit on some R2 properties if it has the street frontage, or if it has the overall, lot dimensions and so on, right? So there's so many factors, and yeah, that's a really common misconception is, well, it's R2, I can do whatever I want for 2 units. Well, not necessarily.
Yeah, you always need to confirm with the city to see what you're actually legally allowed to do, because the worst thing you can do is buy a zoned R2 up-down duplex and find out, well, it doesn't have the correct occupancy or doesn't have the correct zoning by the city standards, right? And that's where you have to be careful with making sure that all your boxes are checked when you're buying an investment property or a multi-unit in general. Andrew, I want to poise back to the secondary suites for you. We heard what Drew's opinion is and how his parents are capitalizing off of that opportunity. Do you have any clients right now using the opportunity to kind of build more pathways to income for themselves?
I've seen a couple people do it. I haven't run into too many of them. I did run into like one of the garage units, and I'm all for it. Like, to me, if you have a garage and it's separately wired and plumbed and everything, like, why not be able to do it? A huge problem is the lack of housing. So that's a good way to create more of it. I don't see any problems with it for sure, but I agree. I don't think the full effects have been seen from it yet. And I think it'll just keep going up and up, but it's kind of a cool little initiative. And I was a little surprised to see it come from the city, to be honest, just because it seems like they're so, set in their ways or so strict about everything. So
I think the Savage mayorship is much better than the Kelly one, in the sense that it's a little bit more pro-development and pro-expansion, but there's still that really conservative element when it comes to expansion in the city that is very prevalent in city.
Yeah, and look, don't get me wrong. Like, I don't want to see views from Citadel Hill be blocked. Like, there's lots of things I want to preserve too, but at the same time, I want to see the city grow. So, but part of the reason I love Halifax is that it is, I whenever you go to a restaurant, you see somebody, and that is a nice aspect of it. Like, I don't necessarily want Halifax to become Toronto, but I think that we can still grow and still, maintain the overall Halifax culture and grow the city better economically for everybody, really.
Andrew, maybe that's less about Halifax being so small. Maybe you knowing too many people.
That was giving my counter.
I don't travel too far from home.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm going to pose this question to both you guys, but I want to hear Drew's response first. We know that the HRM market is at a peak point of hot. do you have certain neighborhoods or pockets of markets that you still think is ideal for investing right now in terms of getting involved and getting into and purchasing a property right now? Do you see any good deals in certain markets, an opportunity?
Yeah, yeah, it depends. There are some opportunities off market. If you take a quick look on Kijiji, you'd be surprised what you can find. There are some sellers who think that their properties are worth more than they are, but there are others who radically underestimate the actual value. Not to take advantage of people, but you'd be surprised as to what you can find. There's one on Herring Cove Road, corner of Herring Cove and Maplewood, that is a legal duplex there right now, but it's only at the front of a flag lot that could actually be subdivided on the Maplewood side, but it's under 4. And that's right by the roundabout, right? So it's one of those things anyway. But the pockets for like sweet deals, no, there are no deals to be had here. It's just a matter of securing a location that you can keep for future growth and future development. I'd say Fairview's still a little undervalued for where it is. I mean, it is effectively the West End. Just Joe Howe, this arbitrary cutoff is suddenly the increase of value of 10 or 15%. So I think Fairview is still relatively good for that. I think Clayton Park Rockingham is a write-off at this point. They're the same prices at the West End right now, so I don't think that's a good place to look. But parts of Dartmouth and not downtown Dartmouth, those are inflated. I think that North End Dartmouth, like anything off of Windmill and Victoria.
I love North End Dartmouth. It's my favorite place for investing. I love Andrew, same question to you. Do you see anything in there that you like, any pockets in this market in HRM that you're like, there's still opportunity here if you buy and hold over 10 years, or like maybe for BR.R.R.R in your strategy, something like that?
Well, I actually got to go. So I got to go knock on that guy's door on the corner of Herring Cove and Maplewood. So
Andrew, if you want his number, I can send it to you.
You know what? I agree. I really like Fairview from an investment standpoint. I still like the peninsula just because I see the overall growth. And you look at the development that's coming there. I just think the long-term growth there is going to be nice. But Fairview is a big one for me. Certain pockets in North End Dartmouth, I agree, especially the ones that are close enough to walk to like where the McDonald Bridge is, like up in like Allen Lake and those kind of areas. Again, certain pockets in Spryfield, certain pockets in like Southdale kind of area, anything where there's, big growth going on around it, right? I like, I agree. I think Clayton Park is kind of a write-off just because of the price points we're seeing there.
Yeah.
I look at Fairview, for example, as, what the north end of Halifax looked like 10, 12 years ago. Yeah. I think, when you look back at, when you see a listing come up in the north end now and what they paid for it 10 years ago, it's just like, oh my God, like where was I then? And why didn't I buy every property I could get my hands on? Right. So
well, even just 2 years ago, I helped a couple buy a place on Union Street. It's sold now, so this is full disclosure. They paid $600 for it, but they just listed it for $675 and sold it for $866. It's a pretty good return for 2 years of investment.
Pretty great. Yeah, you can't get that in the stock market is the reality.
Yeah. To add on to that, I do love Spryfield in the sense of like I love what Governor's Brook is doing to the rest of the area in terms of dragging up the prices. I happen to have a good close friend of mine purchase a 3-unit on Herring Cove Road across the street from the new high school that they're building.
Yep. And
he purchased it 2019 for $172, I think it was. And there's a full detached power garage. So he turned the 3 units into 3 rentals, and then he turned the garage into a 4th suite. And he went to the bank for the refi, and I think it came back at 612. It's a knockout of the park. He hit a homer and he did all work to it. But like in terms of like, I love Spryfield because I still think there's lots of opportunity for how run down some of those homes are in and around Herring Cove Road in that part of Spryfield, especially where the old Jubilee High School is, where they're tearing it down, like in that neighborhood as well, where you don't see as much development. I still think there's a lot of opportunity to acquire assets for as we've been talking about this all the time, equity gain and riding the market and letting the market pull you up is a really good opportunity as well. Drew, for you, if you're anyone trying to get into investing right now and they're just trying to get involved in the market, do you have any advice for them in terms of how to get involved in the market or how to get in the market right now?
The first thing is to set expectations.
Okay.
Because if you don't set the expectations, then you are not to sound too strong, but unless you're telling them how things are going to be, then you're leading them astray and not doing them any service or justice whatsoever.
Yeah.
In terms of how to get started, obviously, if your money is in order, great. I know a great book that's actually written by Gary Keller. It's called The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. It's incredible. So it's only about $25 on Amazon. I do recommend it. You don't have to be a Keller Williams agent to buy it. So it's anyways, I have read it. It's really good. It's got some amazing strategies in there, which is really good too. So but yeah, no, the biggest one is expectations, and the other thing is determining location, because location determines price and future growth. As far as Andrew has mentioned before, buying on the peninsula is still not a bad idea. It's no different than, say, 100 years ago buying on Manhattan instead of Brooklyn. Now, Brooklyn has gone up too, but Manhattan has gone up substantially more than that, right?
Yeah.
And Halifax is our municipality's Manhattan, and I think that's you should consider that too.
Okay, Andrew.
I'd agree with what Drew just said, but something I come across a lot from a different angle is I'm a huge advocate of first-time home buyers buying their first home with like a basement unit or buying a set of flats.
Yep.
A, it helps them get into the market, helps with their approval. And B, like that's how I started. And I think back to, 4 years ago when I bought my Windsor Street property, like, I could have went to Beachville and got a really nice house, or I could have went, somewhere else on the outskirts and got a really nice house. But where would I be at now is kind of what I look like. And that kind of started the whole path for my, investment portfolio. So now I have a triplex on Windsor Street. It's a great cash flowing property. Obviously I bought it 4 years ago, so that helps. But I had to do a lot of work to get it to where it is now. And now I have my personal home, and I just bought like my second rental property. So now I have 5 doors plus my personal home. And really the Windsor triplex is anchoring that whole thing. And I just find a lot of young people really want to rush to get, the really nice, home in Bedford West or something like that. And it's not, there's anything wrong with that. But if you're thinking investment wise, down the road, 5% down into a $400,000 property for a couple people who are 28 years old, and they could, even if you just live there a couple of years and then go buy something else at 5% down,
yeah,
you're really helping establish the foundation to your investment portfolio. And you're saving that, you're not having to go at that 20% down payment, which most times is the hurdle for people, right? Like,
yeah.
And on top of that, I love like the B.R.R.R.R method, because, and it sounds like, everybody talks about it, but it's smart. Like the Yale Street property, for example, I don't know the numbers right off the top of my head, but when I put the work into it, plus refinance it in like a year from now, I'm going to be sitting there basically getting all of my money back. And if not all of it, very close to it. And I mean, including down payment as well, which is 20%, which is a lot of money. And I'm putting that right back into my pocket. So then I can go buy another one. So it keeps that train rolling. Right. And that's something that I wish I kind of knew earlier than now. I'd rather do something that needs more work now, but in a year I can buy another one, as opposed to this one's great and it needs no work, but I just tied up my cash for like 5 years to save up enough to go buy another one. So
yeah, and that's why I love B.R.R.R.R is getting your money out at the back end, so that you can go and buy it, you can go again. That's kind of that's why I always encourage B.R.R.R as much as I possibly can for those people that don't know any much about it. Andrew, this is just a question from my own side. Do you do your own renovations?
No, I do not.
Okay.
Smart man, very smart.
That picture on the wall behind me, I did put that up there, but it's only one nail, not two, so I didn't have to level it and stuff. But yeah, you know what? For the people that can, like, great. I wish I could. I'm not handy. In my opinion, I'm better off paying people and still doing my job. And it kind of cancels it out. But yeah, I would say I'm savvy in the sense of I usually project manage my own projects, and I just use a contractor and I use my own sub trades. But yeah, it takes a while to get that team as well, and to get the good people that, so that it runs smoothly. I'm really excited about this one because I think it's going to run twice as smooth as all my previous ones. So, and you know what? Super excited about it. And probably a week after closing, I'll be like, why did I do this? But I'll be happy at the end result. But it might be a frustrating summer dealing with the big reno.
Yeah. I got one last always question for Andrew. Is Danica doing it?
No, she's not. She is not. She might do some little, like some small finishing things, like some shelving, or like there's one area I want to put like an old barn door, which I have an old door for my house on Clifton. So I'm just gonna like restain it and stuff. And it's like one of those, really cool, like 100-year-old doors. But
Yeah,
no, she's busy. She has some other stuff in the works that's
course she
really
does.
exciting. So yeah, you'll see that kind of stuff soon.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll hear about it. Thank you guys so much for coming on. While I still have a few minutes left, I do want to open up the floor to Q&A because people have been sitting here listening to us talk for the last 55 minutes. So if anyone has a question for Drew or Andrew, you can unmute and jump on in, or just send it through the chat. I'll read it off, and we can hopefully get a little more dialogue and hopefully give you guys a few more clarity on questions you guys may have that we haven't covered today. Anyone have a question for Drew or Andrew? This always happens. Come on, humans. No. Oh, you
Wait,
in?
no, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on and sharing this great information. So my question is, for multifamily right now with the rent cap, how do you even make sense of purchasing something, within HRM that's rarely cash flowing, but still got tons of competitions? And last year when the rent cap, came up, we just thought, probably the multifamily going to cool down, but it's actually I would say it's the opposite. So I guess my question is, how do you guys, make sense of that? Like, what do you see your clients are thinking about it, or even just making that decision? Thank you.
Andrew, do you want to go first? Do you want me to take a crack at that?
I can go first.
Go. Fly, little starling.
Again, I think it totally depends. So here's a real life example. You have a 6-unit property. Maybe it's break even cash flow wise, but the rents are really low. And maybe your client's desire is a long-term hold. So they're going to hold it for, 10 to 20 years. In that case, I would say it's maybe not a bad thing, especially if it's an area that's going to grow in value, and hopefully the rent cap sorts itself out and you can start upping the rent, or just increasing them as tenants leave. The problem is, and this is the impossible question to answer as well, when am I going to be able to raise the rents? And that's the tough thing. So if it's only a 5-year plan, I would probably steer clear of them. If it's a long-term plan, I would be a little more inclined to say that, you could still go at it, but it really would depend on kind of where that cash flow is now and where could it get to, and give or take, how long is that going to take, right? And I think a big part of that is like, are the leases periodic year over year, or are they fixed term? That's a big one, I think. Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. I get these questions almost every day, and I don't really know how to answer them other than that, to be honest. Like, I'm kind of curious to see what Drew's going to say, because I'm hoping he'll give me some ammo for questions going forward.
So again, most people who are going to buy a multifamily are business savvy, have that numbers, future gains. They look at trends, they look at spreadsheets, they look at, how things are, in terms of population growth. They look at development, they look at everything, at least a good one would, right? So the rush to get in and buy a multi-unit is that driving force to get in while they see the upward trend, because now is actually cheaper than it will be effectively in 5 years or so. So if they don't buy now, even if they're competing for it, even if they're paying more and the rents are too low, but they can go up, it's securing it now so that they don't have to fight like crazy for it in 10 years.
And pay.
And that increase in demand is putting the strain on the supply, because everyone sees what's happening and they want to do it now, because again, Manhattan effect, right?
Yeah. You in?
Sure. Jason, I cut you off. You were saying something?
No, all I was going to say is, in a sense of like, in 5 years time, who knows what that property is going to be worth, right? Who knows what the entry fee to owning the asset on the Halifax Peninsula, we're talking a multi-unit, is going to actually be valued at in 5 years time versus now. Like people today say, looking at today's market in 2021, they'll always say, oh, in 2017, it was worth this. In 2018, 2019, it was worth these prices. Well, we'll be saying that about 2021's prices in 24, 25, 26. So if you own the asset today in 2021, in 5 to 10 years time, as long as you're planning on holding the asset for a long period of time, like Andrew said, he's not going to get rid of it for a long period of time. He's going to hold for 20 years. As long as you hold that for so many years, rather than looking for a flipping or a quick sale off of it, the market will 9 times out of 10 usually only complements your holding ability. So in a sense of holding the location, that's probably where most investors are going to compete and are happy to compete today, because they see it as a long-term investment strategy over the next 5 to 10 years. And they understand that once the rent cap, either as Andrew predicts, will come back into play, or it may be alleviated. I doubt it'll be alleviated, but even in 3 to 5 years, when those tenants flip over, you can always bring up the leases to market value. It's just eating the cost to get in now for a long-term gain.
Well, the other thing to consider as well is that, oh God, I had a great idea. It just totally disappeared out of my head. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Had a moment.
While you're thinking about that, here's something to think about, right? What's the best time to buy real estate? The
Now.
answer is right now, but really the answer was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And that's always the case. But the second best time is right now,
Always.
especially in a market like this, that's still, I think we're getting relatively close to that tip of the iceberg that, what we're seeing right now is not sustainable, in my opinion. So if you're looking at, right now prices are up 36%. Well, over 3 years, that means housing prices double in HRM. So in other words, a bungalow in Woodlawn that's selling for $350 right now is going to be worth $700 in 3 years. So if it is sustainable, that would mean that a lot of clients are coming from out of province.
Yeah.
Because
So I finally remember
our own population.
I remember what I was going to say, and that kind of matches to what Andrew was talking about as well. You hear all these economic speculators talking about a real estate bubble or prices going down or whatever. The prices, I have to say, and this is my prediction, and tell me if I'm wrong, the prices themselves are here to stay, but the rate at which they increase is the problem. It's not necessarily the pricing itself. So as long as the rate with which they increase levels out, which is what happens in Halifax to create a balanced market, then we'll be fine. But if you expect a bungalow in Rockingham, which I bought this place for $386 2 years ago, to that be the new price for a house in Rockingham? No, they're $680 now, right? That's here to stay. That is not going to change. And anyone who predicts or hopes for a market correction, implying that the market prices now are just wrong, this doesn't mean they're not wrong. That's the new reality. Then if the prices go down dramatically, then we're talking about a massive economic problem, and housing prices will be the least of your concern.
Well, the reality is this, right? So a semi in Sackville, for example, I work the Sackville market a lot. I'm from Sackville. A semi in Sackville 2 years ago, a pretty nice one, 180 to 210, right? Right now, it's 250 to over 3. I don't think when the market corrects that you're going to see semis in the low 200s in Sackville. I think those days are long gone. And if you talk to people like my father or like Linda, like my broker Linda, or we all know them, people who have been in the industry since the early 90s, they'll tell you this. At a certain point, nobody ever spent more than $90,000 on a semi in Cole Harbor or Sackville. That was like the price that it would never go over, right? And then all of a sudden, one sold for 96 that was really nice. And then from that point forward, not one sold under 90 ever again. And that's kind of what we're seeing now, is now all of a sudden, and it escalated the time frame because of COVID, but we were already on the way here anyway.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you can't get a semi for under 220 anymore unless it's like it really needs a lot of work, right? And it's just like that happened in like a year, right? Same thing with multi-units, same thing.
And
the seller's market started before COVID. The COVID crisis ever happened.
100%.
Slow. Yeah.
100%. I remember losing. My first ever competition in my career was June 2019. Someone spent $100,000 over asking, and I lost. I lost going 75 over for a up-down duplex on Pleasant Street in Dartmouth. And I went back to our office, Drew, and told Ann and maybe Richard Payne back then. And I walked in all solemnly sad, and they're like, "What happened?" I was like, I just finished fourth, going $75,000 over asking, and they both were like, "What?" Yeah, it was unheard of.
Well, it's funny. It was in January of 2019. We had a listing that got asking price, and I was like, "Whoa, that was easy." And then 2 weeks later, we wrote in another property, and we had to, compete. And I was like, "Okay, we'll go 1,000 over asking. That's the typical way of doing it." And we lost. And I was like, "Oh, what happened there?" And we looked at the bulletin afterwards. It was 10,000 over asking. Like, okay. So I looked at Angela. We were renting at the time because I wanted her to get used to the area. And I said, "If we don't buy now, we're screwed. Like, we need to do it right now."
Yeah.
This house came up. 3-level side split at the end of a cul-de-sac in Rockingham, 386. We paid 6,000 over asking for it. I could turn it around tomorrow and sell it for 7.
Yeah. I do want to bring it back to Ewan's question, because I do think I also want to touch on one thing when I look at the market and projection over the next 3 to 5 years, and that's the supply. I watch the supply very, 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 like, I'm obsessed with it, because like the only, like, to truly have to have market correction, Andrew, as Drew said, you need either, if you have a true market correction, then we have a very, very distinct economic problem, which if we go back to 10 years ago in Halifax, and Andrew, you'll know this because we're roughly the same age. I'm 29, you're 30. When we were graduating high school, we heard the same thing. You need to leave Nova Scotia to go get a good job. That's not a thing anymore. Most of my friends had to leave the province, Alberta or Ontario, to go get good jobs. Now we're attracting good jobs. So for that to happen, that economic collapse to happen, you would need people to lose jobs and have to sell homes, which is how you get the flood of supply from the market. Our single family homes right now in HRM, I think we're down to like 500 units in total. Last time I checked.
6 months as of May 1st.
Yeah, exactly. Like, to have the market correct, you would need a substantial amount of single family homes to flood the market. For just you, and like the way development's looking, does anyone know of any, like Andrew and Drew, you guys might know more of this than I do. Do you guys know any major developments that are currently being planned or proposed in HRM
Paper Mill Lake? Paper Mill Lake's a big one.
Have they broken ground?
No, I don't think so.
So how far out are these homes? You know what I mean? Like,
I think 2 years for the first completion, if I recall correctly, but
yeah.
I don't know for sure, so please don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
The other ones are all on the peninsula. Their Dexel's going crazy right now with all their stuff, but that's because they've been sitting on their plots of land for 20 plus years. They've been waiting until this spike in order to be able to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
But no, in terms of residential developments, Fisherman's View is okay, but I think it's almost sold out at this point. Yeah, there's not a whole lot left.
Rumblings of Glen Arbor.
Yeah.
That was just purchased, I believe.
Is that the one connecting Glen Arbor and Indigo?
Like, there's a lot of rumblings of the golf course. See you later.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And the people that just bought it are developers.
Oh.
Nothing confirmed, but that's kind of through the grapevine of what I've heard. So that would be a big one. But no, there's not enough.
there's not enough homes, like to have the market correct, or even, as we say, like, calm down. You either need buyer demand to fuck off, or you need supply to come back up. That's what it comes down to, fundamentally speaking. And will buyer demand go away? Like, I understand right now we're seeing an influx thanks to the COVID pandemic, but like, does anyone really foresee that going away once we're normal? Because we're still the cheapest hub in Canada. Like, people are now realizing from Ontario and BC that we actually have good internet, which is always a really weird question every time you talk to anyone from Ontario or BC.
I think that once there are some people who are a little bit more relieved and relaxed, who want to sell their house as opposed to have to sell their house, that will create an influx, I think. But no, it won't be dramatic. The bank foreclosures that were supposed to happen haven't, because of federal government assistance. If anything, the only bubble of sorts or change that I think would hurt the country would be the feds having overextended themselves and interest rates go up and we can't pay our interest on our debt.
Yes.
I think that should concern people more than real estate prices, as far as I'm concerned, because then that changes everything.
Yeah. The raise.
If in 5 years from now, when everybody's fixed term rate is up and they're no longer in a 2.2 fixed, they're in a 3.7 fixed, what's that create, right? And I know the stress test is there and so on, but let's face it, most people when they're pre-approved to say 500, they're like laughing at me on the phone. They're like, I can't believe the bank would give me $500,000, and that's at the current stress test.
Yeah.
So if they buy at 450 and then all of a sudden their rate is, 40% higher than it was, it could create problems for sure.
And I think that's enough of your question.
Hopefully we answered your questions as opposed to rambling like we did for a little bit, especially me. I'm the worst one.
No. This is a good information, and I don't want to keep hogging the mic, but yeah, I'll have more questions but
I got one more, man. No one else is speaking up. Fire off.
Okay, cool. All right, two more. So first, to follow up on my first question, so I understand what everything you guys just said. About all these investors, they do their numbers, they're looking at the potentials. But I get that. But let's just say the rent cap is here to stay. The value add component of multifamily, then how do you make sense of that, right? And for multifamily, especially for value add to make sense, you have to increase the rent. You do some work, you increase the rent, then you get your payday. But with the rent cap, staying here, especially Andrew, you mentioned you're probably going to see this, for another. After February, will still be here. How do you guys make sense of that? How do you even implement that strategy anymore? And you're gonna have to.
That's the problem.
Because the cap rate, I understand the cap rate is low, like 3-4. How you can't expect it to go to 2 or 1, right? Like, given that into perspective, how do you guys make sense of that?
We'd have to adapt like anything else for new strategies and making the money work. Frankly, I don't think that I do think that with the influence and influence that a lot of wealthy landowners have with lobbying the city or the government, I don't think the rent cap, while I do agree with Andrew, it will be renewed. I don't think it's something that will stay indefinitely. It doesn't make practical sense in a major city. It is nothing but ruinous for everyone. It slows the economy down. It's not going to help. And once we start seeing the effects of that, I think then that cap will be removed. But I do believe it's here to stay for now, like Andrew said. So I think that we just need to hunker down and think of long-term strategies.
And I also think, like, if there was a rent cap long-term, maybe not like this renewal after this one, but like going forward in like 3 to 5 years from now, I don't think it can be 2%. I just don't. Let's face it, property taxes and water bills and stuff go up more than 2%. Like, my insurance on all my rentals just went up big time. So I think if there is like a long-term cap, I think it's going to be I think it has to be more in the 8 to 10 range for it to even remotely make sense. And even then, it's really tough based on the situation that we're describing right now, right? So in short, to your question, like, it doesn't make sense right now, realistically, to renovate properties when you can only raise the rent from 1,000 to 10-20, right? Like, it doesn't make sense realistically.
All right, thanks.
Andrew, I have a question for you from Alex Field, who asks, can Andrew share more details about the process and cost of adding legal units?
Oh yeah, definitely. I could vent about this for like a year, like literally 365 days.
Well,
But
can we get it shortened?
yeah, so in short, I had a 2-unit property. When you look at the bylaws, the only thing that doesn't meet spec for that property to be 3 units is the lot size. So my lot size was like 6,800 square feet, and it needs to be 8,000 in my area that property is in. I had enough parking. Like, the lot coverage was fine. Everything else was okay bylaw wise. So I went down to HRM and talked to them, and they told me I need to pull a variance. I said, oh, great. How do I do that? So better yet, it gets so much better. You have to apply for a permit to put the 3rd unit in, even though you know it will be declined. By the way, this costs $350. So you go in and you pay $350, and in 6 to 8 weeks, they decline it, just like they would. And then you have to apply for the variance, which, oh, by the way, it also costs, I think it was $500 for the variance. So you apply for the variance, and basically what happens is you say, this is what I want to do, and this is why I should be allowed to do it. So I gave examples in that of, here's 5 other properties within 2 blocks of me that are legal 3 units that are on lots that are smaller than mine because they were grandfathered in or whatever. Here's the property right next door that's 36 units just on the other side of the street, yada, yada, yada. If the city approves the variance, then they send out letters to everybody within 100 meters of your property saying this is what your neighbor wants to do, and you have 2 weeks to let us know if you want to go against it. If nobody speaks up, it's approved. And that's what happened in my case. And I actually talked to a couple of my neighbors because I kind of thought they might be a little bit difficult on it, but it was okay. If they do speak up, then you get assigned to a hearing date and you have one of those hearings, which is kind of what you hear about of like, you know, the Willow Tree building, for example, on corner of Quimpool and Robie, like, because they were fighting for their height, right? So that's an example of that. So then you go and you have a hearing and you plead your case of why you should be able to do it. And then the neighbor who has a problem, you know, pleads their case and you hope that you get it, basically. So that's kind of the process. I have heard they're starting to streamline this from just you apply for the variance. If it's in the new center plan, I think is the way it was working. And correct me if I'm wrong, Drew, if you know more about that, but I've heard from a couple people that they're starting to streamline that. And you can just make a variance request and you basically just like do a written report of why you should be allowed, and they either approve it or they.
It is much more streamlined now. Yes, it's less cumbersome.
This was like 2.5 years ago when I did this.
And
And
it was a nightmare. Back then it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
All right. I think before we wrap this up, I'm gonna show for one last question. Anyone have you? And if you have a third, you said you had a third. If you want to speak up, I'll let these guys go because I know that they have stuff to do today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be quick. I want to just touch on the supply side things real quick. I get it. Like, you know, Halifax is hot, is booming, and everybody is going here. But let's just say Halifax have, you know, demographic wise, we do have a lot of senior people, right? And a lot of the home ownership are actually under, you know, people who's, you know, I don't know, age more than 70, 75 or something. So how do you guys see that fact play in this this market? Let's just say when the COVID stuff, you know, gets better, those homeowners will probably get into the market. They will probably thinking about selling. Yeah. So I would think that will add tremendous, you know, part of the supply. How do you guys think of that? Like, have you ever considered?
I'll let you guys go first, and I'll say my piece on this one.
It would have to be a massive number of people listing who are retiring and selling their assets for any dramatic change to the supply demand ratio. Like what Andrew was saying, how, you know, in terms of like economic issues or whatever, it would have to be like losing jobs and needing to sell homes that on a massive scale that would require the market to change. A couple elderly people selling their homes will just be drops in a bucket unless it's a widespread trend that's happening all at the same time. It's not going to make a huge difference.
Andrew?
I think we've seen a lot of baby boomers already get out of the market. And I think that's a like when I think back to 2016, 2017, almost all the houses I was showing, it seemed like they were baby boomer or a little bit older demographic houses. And what I mean by that would be like, for example, a bungalow in Woodlawn, and this is more on the residential side, but it's the same thing either way. Bungalow in Woodlawn, all new roof, plumbing, electrical, oil tank, furnace, siding, windows, and everything inside original. So I think we've seen a lot of downsizers already, and most of the downsizers I've worked with, and I don't know what your guys' experience is, but most of them getting out are going straight to apartments. They're not going from bigger house to bungalow to apartment. They're going 3,600 square foot house to 1,200 square feet on Larry UTEC.
Yeah.
So I think we've seen a lot of that, but yes, in theory, there's still more of it to come. And hopefully that will help the supply. I can tell you that while everybody thinks that we as realtors love this market, I would love there to be more supply. And I'm not asking for 10 months, but you know, a few, just a few would be great, right?
I would agree with Andrew as well. The perception is that we have a really good job right now. And I'd say, yeah, if you have a boatload of listings, you're laughing. But if you're running around with 25 to 30 buyers, like, you know, any top producer does,
yeah,
it's exhausting, and you know, in an emotionally and physical way.
Yeah. To elaborate just on that final point, if the market were to flood with baby boomers, I truly believe with as Drew touched on with the oh man, I lost my train of thought. with whatever supply we were going to get from COVID. So before COVID happened in March 2020, we were expecting a very busy spring market in 2020 market. That didn't happen because so many sellers decided to wait until after COVID passed. We're going to get that supply. We're going to get the bankruptcies from financial fallout from, the travel industry, the hospitality industry. They're going to come as well after the mortgage loan programs have passed up. That supply, this is a theory. I think wherever the market settles, it'll cause a blip, and that might be it in a sense of rising prices. So like maybe we settle at $500,000 average home price for a year because we're getting all that supply in. I don't think it drops the prices, and I don't think it significantly impacts us in the future. I just think it helps, as Andrew said, gives us a little more supply for 6 to 8 months so that we don't have to be running into every house every day for our clients to get in an offer. But that's the most I see happening in that sense, is just maybe it causes, instead of a really hot sellers market, we move into maybe a happy balanced market for a few months. That would be where I sit on that one as well. Okay.
My closing remarks are, I'll try to keep this as clean and clear as possible. At my old brokerage in the closing room, there was a picture of an old couple on the wall, and it was meant to be funny. I was like, oh, that's a cute little hand-drawn old couple. And the caption writes, "The young couple that waited for the price of real estate to go down." So like Andrew said, the time is now.
Yeah.
It'll be a really interesting 18 to 24 months here. Yeah. Very, very interesting to see what will happen in this market.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Very insightful.
No worries.
My pleasure.
That's it, guys. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew and Drew. I really appreciate you guys taking the morning. I see you both looking at your phones. I know you got realtors calling. I know you got offers to write. I know you got houses to view. As always, guys, thank you for coming. Thank you for your time. This will come out in the audio of the Halifax Real Estate Podcast sometime whenever I get it. It will probably be a few weeks before it comes out. I will put up little clips of the audio for social media. I'll send them to Drew and Andrew for their own profiles as well. Once again, guys, thank you so much. Have a great day. I hope you guys get lots of offers and hope we get some deals accepted. All right.
Take care. Godspeed.
Bye, guys.